From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Things may be changing soon for some crops in Africa. A group called the African Orphan Crops Consortium says these plants are not getting enough attention, and it thinks they could help ease hunger and improve diet on the continent. The group opened the African Plant Breeding Academy last year in Nairobi, Kenya. The academy is the product of cooperation among international organizations. They hope to use genetic information from 100 African plants and trees that researchers say have been ignored. But food scientists say these crops have many possibilities. Howard Yana Shapiro is a senior fellow at the University of California, Davis. He is also the chief agricultural officer and global director of plant science and external research for the Mars Candy Company. Mr. Shapiro says he began thinking about ways to improve diet at the local level after seeing how poor nutrition affects children in Africa and India. He says the health of babies is affected when women have a poor diet during pregnancy. These health problems, he says, cannot be corrected. Mr. Shapiro says hundreds of African plants have been ignored because they are not economically important to international trade. But food scientists say the plants still have value to people living in Africa. The African Orphan Crops Consortium plans to train plant researchers about the genetics of these crops. The group hopes that farmers will use this information to produce more food with higher nutrition levels. Mr. Shapiro says anything researchers learn will be shared with the world without cost. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, is seeing big changes. To many people, the city now seems like one very large building project. Heavy equipment blocks roads, causing traffic delays. One taxi driver says the roads are so crowded and traffic so slow that he has had to ask his passengers to pay more. The United Nations says areas of poor living conditions make up 80% of Addis Ababa. So city developers have proposed a 10-year master plan. It includes more than 1 million new low-rent houses, as well as new office buildings. New roads and railways are being built to connect all the planned buildings. Abram Workna is an urban planner from Addis Ababa University. He says development can have unpleasant short-term results. He says people lose their homes and their farms to make room for the expanded area. He sees a problem of social links being destroyed as communities disappear under high buildings. The urban planner says city master plans are sometimes ignored. He says many historic buildings are destroyed during such intense development. The new roads and other infrastructure projects in Addis Ababa are going up faster than first planned. Often, the space intended for parking vehicles is instead used for more building. The city government says this is a learning experience for everyone. Haragat Alemu is an official at the Land Development and Urban Renewal Agency. He says the city must develop methods to enforce the master plan. Work on new roads and an elevated train are expected to be finished in 2017. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Top trade officials reported progress, but no final deal after meetings in Singapore at the end of 2013. They met to discuss details of the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The plan calls for removing non-tariff trade requirements among 12 Pacific nations. Supporters say the TPP would make trade easier and create jobs in those countries. But critics say some of the requirements exist to help protect workers and the environment. The 12 nations are responsible for about 1/3 of all world trade. They include Australia, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and the United States. Negotiators are attempting to settle several disputes. Some nations are arguing over intellectual property rights for films and music. Charles Bustani is a congressman from the American state of Louisiana. He notes that in 2011, trade exports and imports with TPP countries supported nearly 15 million jobs in the United States. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is an attempt to increase trade by making rules similar from one nation to another. Lori Wallach works with the American activist group Public Citizen. She says government trade rules protect the environment and the health of workers and people who buy imported goods. She says rules that make work conditions safe or protect health are under attack if they are defined as a barrier to international trade. Opposition from labor and consumer protection groups means the proposed deal faces an uncertain future in Washington. The agreement has to be confirmed by many national legislatures, including the U.S. Congress. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Technology Report. North Korea is often seen as a poor country, cut off from the world and lacking in new technology. But officials in South Korea have linked North Korea to recent attacks on computers, and they are describing the North's ability to harm computer systems as world-class. South Korea's spy agency made the claims at a meeting with a committee of the South Korean National Assembly. The National Intelligence Service said North Korea has trained what officials are calling a cyber army. The NIS described 7 North Korean hacking organizations and spy networks operating in China and Japan. Hackers seek out and can affect the electronic communications and records of individuals, businesses, and even governments. Sao Song-ki is a South Korean lawmaker and chairman of the Assembly's Intelligence Committee. He says North Korea established its hacking center in China because it has highly developed internet services and the North's activities can be protected there. He says about 1,700 North Korean hackers and 4,200 supporting agents operate in China. In late 2013, South Korea's KBS TV reported an attack on a business that built computer information systems for the South Korean government. Kim Hung-kwang is president of a group called North Korea Intellectuals Solidarity. He says China knows that North Korean hackers launch attacks from inside Chinese territory. He notes that China has never arrested or expelled any North Koreans. He also says that is why it appears North Korea carries out the attacks with China's approval. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman. From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization expects harvests in the Sahel area of Africa to be smaller in 2013 than they were in 2012. The UN agency says a short rainy season reduced grain and cereal production in several countries in the Sahel. The agency described the conditions in its Crop Prospects and Food Situation report. The report says Chad could experience the biggest drop in cereal production. It also says refugees entering the country have increased pressure on the local food supply. Chad is now home to over 300,000 refugees from Sudan and the Central African Republic. Senegal, Niger, and Mali were also expected to have poor harvests in 2013. Jean Sinahun is an economist at the UN Food Agency's Trade and Market Division. He says the Sahel area has experienced a series of food crises since 2005. He says this has weakened the ability of those countries to deal with another crisis. He says the world needs to pay attention to the more than 300,000 people who have been displaced in Mali. They fled their homes during the country's conflict in 2012. An additional 150,000 Malians are still living as refugees in nearby countries. Jean Sinahun says experts are not yet predicting a major food crisis in 2014. But he says it is necessary to intervene in each area that was affected by the uneven rainfall. Such interventions could include selling cereals at below market prices and food for work programs. The Economist adds that the news about African agriculture is not all bad. He says harvests along the coast of West Africa are likely to be above average. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Many people believe that teaching music to children makes them smarter and better able to learn new things. But the organizers of a new study say there is no scientific evidence that early musical training affects the intelligence of young people. An estimated 80% of American adults think music classes improve a child's ability to learn and do well in school. Researchers at Harvard University, however, have found that there is one thing musical training does not do. They say it does not make children more intelligent. Samuel Mayer is a graduate student in Harvard's School of Education. He says it is a mistake to think that learning to play a musical instrument improves a child's intellectual development. He says the proof comes from studies that measured the mental ability of two groups of 4-year-olds and their parents. One group attended music class. The other went to a visual arts class. He says tests failed to provide evidence that those in music classes were any smarter. Samuel Mayer says only one study of many has seemed to show a small percentage increase in IQ, intelligence scores, among students. But he says musical training can be important for cultural reasons. In his words, we teach music because music is important for us. He notes that the works of writer William Shakespeare are not taught so that children will do better in physics. He says Shakespeare is taught because it is important. He does not think music needs to be any different than that. A report on the effects of music training in children was published in the journal PLOS ONE. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. It was not just another day in a classroom recently for some young people in Washington, D.C. These student volunteers visited the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History to test a new program. Some students explored the mysteries of human bones. Other students examined an insect under a microscope. The student volunteers were among the first to help test a new exhibit, a new showing at the museum. The program has an unusual name, spoken as Curious and written as Q?RIUS. The exhibits are designed so young people can learn about science by taking part in experiments. The program combines the newest technologies and scientific equipment with more than 6,000 museum objects, both real and digital. Students from local schools help develop the exhibit, which combines science and art. Teachers will bring their science students to the exhibit in the mornings. In the afternoons, the exhibits will be open to everyone. Many of the students already have their favorite activities at the center. 13-year-old Nate said he liked exploring the containers with dinosaur bones. Addie is 12 years old. She liked the bee display. She found that the bumblebee and the yellow bumblebee were very different when she examined them under a microscope. Another student, Ben, said he enjoyed an exhibit that lets people use their senses to learn. He said, for example, that a butterfly smells a little like tea. Involving the senses, smell, touch, hearing, is one of the exhibit's major goals. Curious can also be found online. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman. From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Mental health experts often use a treatment called prolonged exposure therapy to help soldiers returning from battle. In prolonged exposure therapy, or PET, patients are asked to remember painful incidents and talk about their feelings. They repeat this process until these memories no longer make them suffer. PET can help soldiers who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. They developed emotional problems because of experiences in battle. PTSD is not limited to soldiers. It is also seen in young women who were sexually abused or raped when they were children. Edna Foa of the University of Pennsylvania helped to develop prolonged exposure therapy to treat PTSD. She believes the treatment can offer such girls a cure that lasts longer than what she calls supportive counseling. She says PET gives them the skills they need to face the memories of their abuse. Her research team compared prolonged exposure therapy to supportive counseling in a group of 60 sexually abused girls. All the girls suffered from PTSD and were 13 to 18 years old. Each girl saw a trained therapist 14 times. Some received PET, the others were given supportive counseling. Dr. Foa says girls treated with PET experienced fewer symptoms and were less likely to suffer from depression than the other girls. They also showed more improvement in quality of life measurements. Dr. Foa says most of the girls treated with PET were thought to be free of PTSD. She adds that social workers can be trained in PET in just 4 days. A report on the study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Poinsettias are the best-selling potted flowering plant in the United States. Red poinsettias are a traditional part of Christmas celebrations, which is why almost all of them are sold in the winter. The Department of Agriculture estimates that Americans bought $250 million worth of poinsettias last year. The poinsettia is native to Central America and needs warmth to grow. Bright red poinsettias are the best known, but there are about 100 different kinds in colors including white, pink, yellow, and purple. The flowers of the poinsettia are very small. Around the flowers are colorful leaves called bracts. These bracts are what give the plants their beauty. The poinsettia is named for Joel Roberts Poinsett from South Carolina. In 1825, President John Quincy Adams appointed him as the United States' first minister to Mexico. Mr. Poinsett had an interest in plants. He saw the colorful plants growing in the wild and sent some cuttings back to the United States. In the 1920s, Albert Ecke and his son Paul became interested in the poinsettia's ability to flower in winter. Paul Ecke thought it would be a good plant to display at Christmas time. They started a farm near Encinitas, California. At first, Paul Ecke and later his son grew large plants in fields. Then they sent them to growers by train. Growers would divide the large plants into cuttings to raise smaller ones in greenhouses until the holidays. Today, Ecke Ranch remains a major supplier in the United States and around the world. In 2012, Paul Ecke's grandson announced that the company was joining the Dutch-based AgriBio Group. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Technology Report. The world's largest solar thermal plant was set to begin producing power in the United States at the end of 2013. Wind and energy from the sun are generally considered clean, unlike energy from coal-burning power stations. But environmentalists now worry that too much solar power development could harm the environment. A California company, Bright Source Energy, has been building a huge solar power plant in the Mojave Desert, about 60 kilometers southwest of Las Vegas, Nevada. The plant is called the Ivanpah Solar Electric Generating System. The company planned to deploy 170,000 specially designed mirrors to direct solar energy towards boilers on top of 3 towers. The steam produced in the boilers would drive turbines to make electricity. Joe Desmond works for Bright Source Energy. He says the steam can reach temperatures of more than 260 degrees Celsius. He says the plant can store the sun's thermal energy in the form of molten salt. With stored energy, he says, the power station can produce electricity even when the sun goes down. Environmentalists generally support the idea of solar power, but there are concerns. Lisa Belenke is with a private group called the Center for Biological Diversity. She says environmentalists are worried about the effect of the Ivanpah solar project on the sensitive plant and animal life in the Mojave Desert. That includes birds striking solar equipment or being burned after flying through the intense heat. As solar projects increase, developers and environmentalists are considering what to do to reduce bird deaths. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Health Report. Telemedicine is the name for when doctors give advice to patients by telephone or the internet. It also describes when healthcare providers in rural areas connect with specialists in big cities. Telemedicine has existed for a long time, but the rise of smartphones, tablets, and webcam-equipped computers is raising telemedicine to new levels. Some healthcare systems in the United States now offer virtual urgent care. Patients see a doctor by video chat without having to leave home. Diana Ray is a nurse educator in the northwestern state of Washington. She recently demonstrated how virtual urgent care works. She used an iPad tablet and Skype, the video chat service, to have a virtual appointment with Dr. Ben Green. He had the patient describe her symptoms. Dr. Green decided that the problem was a sinus infection after having her perform a facial exam that he demonstrated. For medicine, he prescribed an antibiotic. Dr. Green says about 3 out of 4 of his patients have health problems that can be treated like this, through virtual urgent care. That means a video chat could replace a visit to the doctor's office in some cases. Dr. Green treats patients by Skype for the Franciscan Health System, based in Tacoma, Washington. It operates hospitals and other healthcare facilities. Franciscan charges $35 for this kind of virtual house call. That is much less than the cost of going to an emergency room, a doctor's office, or an urgent care clinic. After trying the video conference, Diana Ray says she would have been happy to pay the $35 when she was recently home with a bad cold. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.